Hello there, how are you? Today we're going to talk about modules and functions. Now, as I mentioned before, every function on Elixir needs to be defined inside a module. So if you open up the lib folder, on the generated code, the hello function that we have here is defined inside a tutorial module. So let's create a module from scratch so we can learn the syntax. I'm going to create a new module for dealing with users, for example. So I'm going to create a new file inside lib called users.ex. Okay, so how do I create a module? You can type def module. And as you can see, the Elixir ls did the autocomplete for me, and this looks good. So to define a new module, you're going to use def module and followed by the name of your module. Now, it needs to be uppercase, okay? You cannot do snake case here. It needs to be uppercase, following the Pascal case convention. Followed now, after the name of the module, it's followed by a do, and then you're going to write your functions inside, and that is going to be followed by an end. So that's how you define a module. Okay. And can I define more than one module per file? Yes, you can. I can go down here, def module, and I can create the blog module, for example, inside the users file. I can do that. Now, is that recommended? No. The convention on Elixir is to have only one module defined per file, and typically we try to follow the name of the file for the module. So here, the name of the file is users, so the name of the module is users. Okay, but what if I create a folder? How do we name the module? So what if I have a folder called helpers? And then I have a bunch of files here to dealing with helper functions. For example, I'm gonna have a file for formatting strings. So I'm gonna create a new file for format.ex. What is the name of the file here? Well, if you use the autocomplete from Elixir ls, you're gonna press enter and watch what happens. The recommended name for this module is helpers.format. So this is a way of sort of having a nested module. So we have the format module, which is inside the helpers module. And that is because we have a helpers folder and then a format file inside that. So that's usually the convention that we use for creating modules. We try to follow the folder name, dot, and then whatever file name. Okay, now let's talk about functions. Now that we have a module created here, how do I define a function? Whoa, hold up, Copilot, don't go crazy. You're gonna type def followed by the name of your function. Here, I think I'm gonna create a function to create a new user. So I'm gonna call this function new. So def new followed by a do. Then we're gonna have your code inside, and then that is followed by a end. So very similar to how you define a module. And this is very similar as well to Ruby, because Ruby, if you remove the do here, that's Ruby code, pretty much. But on Elixir, we need the do after the function name, okay? So for now, I'm gonna return a new user. It's going to be a static user for now. How do I return something inside my function? Do I need to type return and then whatever I want to return here? No, because on Elixir, we don't have an explicit return. You're gonna get an error if you save this, like I did here. On Elixir, we only have implicit returns, and by default, the last line of your function is going to be the return of your function. You cannot type return here. And you might be thinking like, why? So like every function I need to return something? Yes, you do. Because when dealing with functional programming, you're always transforming data. You're typically not storing stuff in memory and then mutating that location in memory. No. You're like, you create a function, you create a variable, sorry, and then that variable is going to go through a bunch of functions and get transformed multiple times. And every time you run a function on top of that variable, you need to return the new variable. And yeah, you need to return something from the functions. So by default, the last line of your function in Elixir is your return. Okay, so let's finish this function. I'm going to return a map with a name. The name, yeah, let's use John Doe. And I don't want to use email. I want to use age. Yeah, John Doe is 30 years old. Okay. And how do I run my code? I know that I can call IEX on the terminal, IEX, but that is just going to run a generic Elixir session. This is not going to run the code that you just wrote. Is it possible to use IEX to run my entire application? Yes, it is. So to do that, you're going to type IEX and then this weird text here, dash capital S, and then mix. If you do that, watch what happens. Try to type users on your terminal. Users.new. There you go. You have your entire Elixir application running on this IEX session, which is pretty neat. You're going to use this on Phoenix all the time if you build web applications with Elixir. Okay. Now let's go back to the function. How do I add function parameters? Well, that's pretty simple. You just add a parenthesis after your function name and then whatever parameter you want to add. So here I want to add a name and then an age because having a static name makes no sense. So now I'm going to return a map. The name field inside the map is going to be the name parameter, and then the age is going to be the age. Okay. Now, if I want to run the new code on the terminal, I need to type recompile. And then this is going to recompile your code. Now, if I call users.new, I'm going to get an error because I only have the new function that expects 2 parameters, okay? So I'm going to type users.new. The name could be Daniel. Then the age could be 26. And there you go. This works. Now, let's talk about function arity. I already explained this on previous videos, but yeah, the arity is the number of parameters that your function is expecting. Now, for example, this function here has the arity of 2, okay? And on Elixir, you can do something very cool, which is defining the same function multiple times. So here I can define def new once again, but instead of passing 2 parameters, I can just do this. What is going to happen here? Now I have 2 functions with the same name. This one is expecting 2 parameters. This one is expecting 0 parameters. So you might be thinking, oh, so now I have the same function defined twice, right? No, that's wrong. This is the same function name, but it's not the same function. So on Elixir, every function is uniquely identified by the parent module. So here we have users. users dot, and then the function name, so new, and then the arity of the function. So what we have here is two different functions. They have the same name, but they are different functions. So we have users.new arity2, and then users.new arity0. There are two functions, okay? So they have the same name, the same parent module, but they are two different functions, right? The only thing they have in common is the name and the parent module, but they are two different functions because of the arity, okay? So if I run recompile on my IEX here, recompile, okay. If I start typing the users module dot and I press tab, there you go. The autocomplete says here that I have two functions and not one. I have the new arity0 and then the new arity2. Nice. And to finish this video, I want to talk about function visibility. And what is that? Now, I defined every single function here with def. And as you can see on the terminal, these two functions here, I didn't need to recompile, sorry. If I type users.new, we have two functions and they are publicly available. Like if I type users.new anywhere on my code, I can call these two functions, all right? They're public. Now, what if I want to define one function that is private, that is only accessible inside this module and nowhere else? So let's do that. Let's say that to generate a default user, I need some sort of algorithm. So I'm going to create a function called generate default user. And to generate a default user, I am going to return this, okay? And I don't want the rest of my code being able to generate a default user. Like this function is not important. It's going to be called under the hood by the new function, but I don't want other modules to have access to this. So the only difference here is instead of calling def, we're gonna call def p, which is def private. Pretty easy, right? And then on the new function here that expects 0 parameters, instead of returning this, I'm gonna call the function generate default user. Nice. So if I go on the terminal, I'm gonna run recompile. Okay. If I type users dot, I pressed tab, and as you can see, it does not show the generate default user. It just shows that I have two new functions, but no generate default user. But if I call users.new, under the hood, it's calling the private function generate default user. And actually, to finish off this video, one last small thing is, you might be thinking, okay, this function is pretty simple. Like I'm just calling another function. Is there maybe a smaller syntax for defining a function like in one line? And there is. What we can do here is change the syntax a little bit. It's going to be def new, comma, and then do, colon, and then the name of our function. So let's see if this works. We're gonna run recompile. Okay, now let me call users.new. Well, that works. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching. See you next time.